By March of 1979, the fate of Tokyo Disneyland hung in the balance. The future site of the theme park was a muddy fishing ground in Tokyo Bay that had been reclaimed from the ocean only a few years prior. This land was owned by the Oriental Land Company, and almost 2/3 of the land was zoned exclusively for recreational use. The company hoped to develop a large-scale recreational facility so as to contribute to the nation's culture, health, and welfare. Oriental Land Company's chairman, Kawasaki Chiharu, had been impressed by his visit to Disneyland in the 1960s, and he wanted to build something similar for the children of Japan. He had spent years bothering Walt Disney about building an overseas park in Japan, and he did not let Walt's death stop him. Kawasaki continued to reach out to Disney executives to try and strike a deal, and he was even invited to Card Walker's house for an all-American steak dinner cooked by Walker himself. Eventually, Kawasaki's determination had paid off. 18 years of dogged persistence and months of tense negotiations with Disney had eventually led to a tentative partnership between the two companies in December of 1974. Japan's economy was booming as a newly wealthy middle class had more leisure time. All of the initial feasibility studies were positive. The location was perfect. Disney were impressed by the enthusiasm of both the Oriental Land Company and the township of Ieyasu. Everything looked like it might just work out. The only problem was money. Oriental Land Company had struggled to get funding for Tokyo's version of Disneyland. For their part in the agreement, Disney had agreed to license their characters and designs to the Oriental Land Company for a cut of the profits, but they were not going to provide any financial backing. If Oriental Land Company wanted to build a theme park, they had to do it alone. Meanwhile, Kawasaki had been forced to resign as chairman in 1977 after his first company and a major shareholder of the Oriental Land Company, Keisei Electric Railway, ran into financial difficulty. His lifelong dream of building Disneyland in Japan was starting to look like it would never come true. The Oriental Land Company's other shareholder, real estate company Mitsui Fudosan, had pulled their funding as they considered the project too risky and too expensive. The Oriental Land Company's new chairman, Takahashi Masatomo, had been put in an impossible situation. Even if they now had an agreement with Disney, the park couldn't be built without external funding. The company's initial meetings with banks had been discouraging, as these traditional institutions were reluctant to loan money to the strange foreign idea of a themed park. Eventually, a meeting with the vice president of the Industrial Bank of Japan, who just happened to be a Disney fan, gave the project some hope. Together, they hoped to form a syndicate of banks who would agree to collectively lend the 100 billion yen needed to build Tokyo Disneyland. This syndicate would lower the risk that each individual bank would take on and hopefully make the huge loan possible. But time was running out. Takahashi had agreed to sign the final contract with Disney on April 30th, 1979. Although the proposed loan from the syndicate of banks looked promising, there was still negotiations to be made and details that needed finalizing. There was no way the loan would be confirmed before the contract signing date, and that date could not be pushed back. If Takahashi asked for a postponement, Disney would lose interest in the already rocky relationship. Despite protests and threats from other executives within the Oriental Land Company, Takahashi boarded his flight to Los Angeles as planned and signed the final agreement with Walt Disney Productions, setting into motion the plans to build Tokyo Disneyland. Takahashi later said, "It was not a bold move. I personally felt very cornered at the time. There was no turning back." Back in Japan, all hell broke loose. Oriental Land Company executives and the banks involved in the proposed syndicate were furious that Takahashi had signed the contract before the loans had been confirmed. Despite orders to return to Japan, Takahashi stayed in Los Angeles for a week to play golf like the stone-cold gangster that he was. On his return to Japan, Takahashi apologized to the other executives at Oriental Land Company and set about repairing the company's relationship with the interested banks. Long discussions and negotiations over land zoning laws, local government powers, guaranteed collateral, and debt consolidation that I will not bore you with here, eventually led to a syndicate of 22 banks agreeing to loan 65 billion yen to construct Tokyo Disneyland in August of 1980. Observant viewers might notice that 65 billion yen is far lower than the 100 billion yen that Oriental Land Company had initially asked for. As the magnitude of their task started to dawn on them, it was clear that Tokyo Disneyland would cost much more than they had initially anticipated if they were going to build it properly. To raise the extra funds, Oriental Land Company developed the Participating Company System. This sponsorship program aimed to attract individual companies to sponsor individual attractions, with the company being responsible for funding the attraction's construction. In return, the company would be able to use Tokyo Disneyland in their advertising. The goals of the Participating Company System were organised into a fax machine-friendly numbered list. First, the companies involved all had to be the top of their industry. We want big fish for our big pond. Second, there was to only be one company per industry. The entire park shouldn't be sponsored by just automotive companies. Third, no companies involved in adult industries like gambling or tobacco can participate. We have a family-friendly image to keep up. And fourth, there should be about 15 to 18 companies participating to raise the extra 40 billion yen or so needed to complete the park. But despite Oriental Land Company's best efforts, no one was willing to join the sponsor program. Suntory, Shiseido, and Morinaga & Co. all dropped out of negotiations. Without corporate sponsors to make up the rest of the construction costs, Oriental Land Company would have no choice but to compromise on quality. And as history has shown, it isn't really possible to build a budget theme park. The managing director of construction for Tokyo Disneyland, Hasegawa Yoshiro, said, "Within the constraints of this budget, there was a risk that the authentic charm and quality of Disneyland would not be realized. Ultimately, that was the problem. Disneyland is all or nothing. If we're going to do it, we have to do it in its entirety. There is no other option." Oriental Land Company decided to focus their efforts on one major company, Matsushita Electric Industrial Co. Ltd. Matsushita Electric was one of the oldest and largest companies in Japan. It was founded in 1918 by Matsushita Konosuke, and by the 1980s it had grown to be the largest producer of consumer electronics under a little brand name you might be familiar with, Panasonic. Although he had retired from the company in the early 1970s, Oriental Land Company approached Matsushita Konosuke directly, hoping they could win the company's sponsorship by appealing to his personal interest in Walt Disney. You see, Matsushita had spent his retirement writing about his people-first approach to business, and he was very sympathetic to Disney's corporate philosophies. On hearing of the Tokyo Disneyland project, Matsushita said, "It's important to develop this kind of industry of the heart in Japan as well. We should do it." Allegedly, Matsushita was first asked to sponsor Pirates of the Caribbean, as it would be a flagship ride worthy of one of the largest companies in Japan. He turned the proposal down though, stating that even if it was a popular ride, it was not in line with the company's image. Instead of sponsoring an existing ride, Matsushita wanted to develop a new attraction that taught visitors about the history of Japan. He was inspired by Walt Disney World's Hall of Presidents attraction, and he asked for something similar to be designed for Tokyo's park in exchange for Matsushita Electric's sponsorship. This posed a bit of a problem. You see, Disney's initial pitch for Tokyo Disneyland had included attractions based on Japanese folklore, but Oriental Land Company were firm in their desire for an entirely American theme park. Toshiharu Akaba, the spokesperson for Tokyo Disneyland at the time, said that, "We really tried to avoid creating a Japanese version of Disneyland. We wanted the Japanese visitors to feel like they were taking a foreign vacation by coming here, and to us, Disneyland represents the best that America has to offer." The biggest and best attractions from the two American parks had been chosen to be replicated in Japan, with Mickey Mouse and all of his American friends joining them. Are they American? I guess they are. Donald joined the army that one time. Creating an attraction based on Japan's history was not what the Oriental Land Company wanted, but they needed the money and prestige that Matsushita Electric sponsorship would bring, so they agreed to make Matsushita all the samurai animatronics his heart desired. With Matsushita Electrical signed on as a sponsor, other companies began to take interest in the Tokyo Disneyland project, and Oriental Land Company managed to raise another 30 billion yen for the construction of the park. The only question was, what would an attraction about Japanese history even look like? Over in America, Walt Disney Productions were preoccupied with fulfilling the dreams of their own founder. Construction on Epcot Center, the company's newest theme park and the largest private construction project in the world at the time, was one of the most ambitious things they had ever attempted. And, of course, it was behind schedule, over budget, and the opening date was fast approaching. With the park's planned opening only a year away, Epcot Center's project director, Jim Nagy, was asked what his objectives and priorities were. He simply said, to survive. The southern half of this massive park was to become the World Showcase. A huge man-made lake would form the focal point of Epcot, and it would be surrounded by pavilions representing different countries from around the world, arranged as a sort of showcase, if you will. With a combination of themed architecture, shopping, dining, attractions, and staff members that were native to each country, these pavilions were intended to represent the best that each nation had to offer. In the southwestern corner, nestled between the America Pavilion and what would later become Morocco, the Japan Pavilion was taking shape. Out in the lagoon was a replica of the Itsukushima Shrine from Miyajima Island near Hiroshima. A 5-story high pagoda inspired by the Horiji Temple in Nara was to be the main architectural feature, along with a building inspired by the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, koi ponds, and formal garden arrangements.
From classic Europe to the exotic Orient, here you'll stroll to a garden rich with living Japanese art and colorful koi fish ponds.
Dining options would include a sake bar, a casual yakitori stand, and that staple of fancy 1980s dining options, a teppanyaki restaurant. A pavilion based on Japanese culture had appeared early in Epcot Center's planning stages. Disney had been actively approaching countries to try and involve them in the Epcot project, and concept art and potential rides and experiences were made to encourage participation and sponsorship. Mexico's ambassadors were wooed with concept art of a boat ride to Lake Xochimilco. A flying carpet ride was suggested to entice the Arab nations. Some sort of magical moving cafe table that would take visitors through the Parisian streets was proposed to France. And Japan was approached with a concept for a bullet train simulation ride. This attraction appears to have visitors standing up inside a train carriage, as screens in the shape of windows give the impression of speeding through the Japanese countryside. A second attraction concept appeared in 1976. This scale model showed omnimover vehicles similar to those used in the Haunted Mansion, moving through a tranquil Japanese garden and into a row of red torii gates. Concept art for the Japan Pavilion was featured in many internal documents and annual reports during the mid-1970s, indicating that Disney hoped for Japan to be a major participant in the New World Showcase concept. By the 1970s, Japan had recovered from the economic depression caused by World War II and was starting to become a major force in the manufacturing and technology industries. But the Japanese government seemed reluctant to invest in the Epcot project, and a handful of corporate sponsors were the only ones who showed any interest. Neither the bullet train attraction nor the omnimover ride through the garden made it past the drawing board, but Disney kept pushing for something to fill out the rest of the planned pavilion. Herb Ryman, one of the key creatives behind the development of Epcot Center, said later that Disney Imagineers needed to convince the Japanese that they did need an ethnic and cultural presentation. Some of Ryman's concept art, dated 1977, shows an Oni or a demon against the setting sun, suggesting an attraction based on Japan's folklore. By 1978, this idea had developed into an attraction called The Winds of Change, which was to be a 4-act animatronic show with a rotating stage similar to Walt Disney World's Carousel of Progress. The show planned to follow a grandfather telling his 2 grandchildren the history of Japan. These 3 animatronics would sit in various Japanese gardens as projected screens and puppets played out key moments. Different drafts of the script covered Japan's early agricultural history, some segments from the Tale of Genji and famous Japanese folk stories, Japan's meetings with Portuguese merchants and America's naval ships, and the development of modern Japanese culture. The theatre itself would be decorated with examples of Japanese art, including delicate paper screens, painted fans, and woodcuts. Oh, and a puppet that fired a gun. It's here that the development of Epcot Center and Tokyo Disneyland begin to merge. With 2 ambitious parks being constructed at the same time, manpower was stretched thin at Disney. With a Japanese pavilion under development in America and a whole theme park in Japan being designed, duplicating an attraction would save on development time and budget. All in all, it would be some good business synergy. Allegedly, Disney approached Matsushita Konosuke with the Winds of Change show concept, pitching it as an attraction covering Japanese history for his company to sponsor at Tokyo Disneyland. Matsushita rejected the concept, allegedly saying, "We know Japan best. We'll come up with the structure, then if you approve, we're happy to sponsor you." Japanese advertising company Dentsu put out a call for scriptwriters in early 1980, and the final concept for an animatronic show that took visitors through different eras of Japan's history started to come together. The earliest master plans for Tokyo Disneyland have the attraction's show building placed in the home for everything that doesn't quite fit into any of the other themed lands, Tomorrowland. Although the attraction was developed by and for the Japanese theme park at the request of a Japanese company, the idea of business synergy persisted. Meet the World was planned to be the first attraction to open simultaneously in 2 different theme parks, and a large show building was constructed behind the Japan Pavilion at Epcot to house the show's turntable. Construction started on Tokyo Disneyland in January of 1981, with the show now officially being called Meet the World. However, there were some problems coming to light at Epcot. A project status report from February of 1981 shows that the work on the Japan Pavilion's building facades and the show audio is ticking along nicely, if a little behind schedule. The live-action portions of the show are even scheduled to be filmed. But the rest of the work on the attraction is blocked by a major miscalculation. A small label reading Turntable Decision sits in the top left corner of the Gantt chart. Allegedly, the show building constructed for Epcot's version of Meet the World could not have withstood the stress that would have been placed on it by the large revolving stage. This brief mention of a faulty turntable blocking all future development in the status report seems to back up that idea. Internal memos and opening day Epcot promotional media reframed the delay as a Phase 2 of Epcot Center's development. The completion of the second phase of construction, which also included the Horizons ride and Future World, would coincide with the opening of Tokyo Disneyland the following year in 1983. Meet the World is still mentioned as a potential Epcot attraction, just not for opening day. But one other problem was the content of the show itself. Looking back at Japan's history as a world of samurai and geisha and misty mountains felt comfortably distant, but the show was also going to look at the development of modern-day Japan. World War II had only ended 37 years earlier. The horrific mass killings and war crimes committed throughout Asia by the Japanese Imperial Army, Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, the incomprehensibly devastating bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the United States, and America's subsequent occupation of Japan were all well within living memory. How would Meet the World portray this recent past? How would a celebration of Japan play to an American granddad who fought at Iwo Jima, or visitors from across Asia who would come to experience Epcot Center's promise of international peace and unity? How does the reality of human suffering on a massive scale factor into your business synergy? Epcot Center opened on October 1st, 1982. And all mentions of an animatronic show for the Japan Pavilion were quietly dropped from internal materials and press releases. After years of financial struggles and difficult negotiations, Tokyo Disneyland finally opened on April 15, 1983.
At Tokyo Disneyland, there is one touch of Japan, a new attraction covering Japanese history called Meet the World. But the other attractions will be very familiar to Disneyland and Disney World goers.
Here's American Industrial Robots telling the history of Japan, program not to mention World War II. There's the Haunted Mansion.
Meet the World was placed somewhat awkwardly between the edge of Tomorrowland and the side of the World Bazaar, which was Tokyo's weather-appropriate version of Main Street. The exterior of the building fit in with Tomorrowland's smooth beige aesthetic, and Meet the World originally had a bright orange facade over the main entrance. Unlike other rides at the park, which used Disney's paid lettered ticket system, Meet the World was free to enter. Allegedly, Matsushita was so pleased with the finished attraction, he agreed to cover the entire cost of the attraction's construction and maintenance to keep it free for everyone. After walking around the front fountain, visitors would wait inside a large circular room. The room's domed ceiling had a huge world map on it that showed the local time and major cities, and video screens around the edge showed footage from different countries. Staff working the attraction would inform visitors that they were about to travel back in time to learn about Japan's history. The staff uniform for Meet the World was a beige suit with a kimono-style jacket edged in dark brown. As Meet the World was the only attraction that dealt directly with Japanese culture, it seemed fitting that the staff costume was also distinctly Japanese-inspired. Meet the World's rotating theatre layout was actually the inverse of the one used for Carousel of Progress. Visitors sat in rows of seats that were on the inner ring of the theatre, looking out towards the stage. This inner ring would then rotate to view each scene that was positioned along the outside of the building. This configuration meant that the stages for each scene could be much bigger and fit more impressive set pieces. Meet the World was a mixture of live-action film segments, animation, and animatronics. It was entirely in Japanese, but the last row of seating had telephones playing an English audio built into the seats for overseas visitors. The show opened with an animated scene of volcanoes forming the Japanese archipelago. This faded into live-action footage of a younger brother and sister named Tomio and Midori playing on a beach. Tomio uses sand to explain to his sister how Japan formed millions of years ago. As they talk, an animated red-crowned crane appears. Cranes have long been a symbol of good fortune, peace, and longevity in Japan, partially due to a belief that they could live for thousands of years. Midori immediately starts questioning this ancient mystical creature and asks about the people who lived in Japan thousands of years ago. The crane then agrees to take them on a journey to discover Japan's history. The crane magics them away to the first large scene, showing animatronic fishermen on the left-hand side of the stage with a live-action backdrop on the screen behind them. The two children could be seen as animatronics on the right side of the stage. In front of the entire stage was a large scrim that allowed the animated crane to appear as though she was standing next to the animatronic children or flying around the stage as she talked to them. These fishermen animatronics represented the Jomon people of early Japan, a prehistoric hunter-gatherer culture who relied on hunting and fishing for sustenance. The scrim then turned into a screen that hid the animatronics. The screen showed live-action footage of wet rice cultivation during the Yayoi period, as Japan transitioned into an agricultural society. Next, it was time for Japan to meet the world, as the crane explains how Prince Shotoku sent a diplomatic envoy to China. The theatre began to rotate to the next scene, and the first version of the attraction's theme song could be heard in the interval. Called We Meet the World with Love, this song was composed by the Sherman Brothers of It's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow and It's a Small World After All fame. After the audience has finished rotating, the second stage shows an elaborate set of the interior of a Tang Dynasty palace in China, with the two child animatronics watching from the right side of the stage again. Through an interpreter, the Chinese emperor wishes Prince Shotoku a safe journey home, and gives the envoy reading and writing implements, as well as gold and silverware. The animatronic scene is hidden by the front screen again, which showed the Great Buddha of Nara and the development of the hiragana writing system from Chinese characters. After Tomio asks if the Buddha is Chinese, the crane gives an incredibly cagey answer, saying that although Japan was influenced by other cultures, Japanese culture is entirely unique. The scene then transitioned into a stormy sea, as 16th century Portuguese sailors are washed ashore in Japan. Through a translator, they ask for help repairing their ship, and begin to trade with the Japanese people. The animatronic scene disappears as another animated segment on the front screen shows Japan learning about firearms and Christianity and traveling abroad to Europe and the Americas. The crane then explained that the Edo period shogun feared the influence of trade and religion from outside the country, so Japan was closed off to the world. The theatre then rotated around to the third scene, which opened with a comedic animated segment showing the unique culture and architecture that Japan developed during their isolation from the world. The next animatronic scene was then revealed, showing the American Commodore Matthew Perry and his black ships arriving in Tokyo Bay. An animatronic of Perry is seen on a large ship set to the right of the stage, while a magistrate and a samurai look on from the shore to the left with the two children. The crane tells the children that Perry was not here to fight and that he wanted beneficial trade for both countries.
We haven't come all this way to fight. Yes, sir. We've come to trade, to be friends.
The animatronic scene then transitioned into a live action scene showing silhouetted samurai fighting. The crane tells Tomoyo Midori that the tide of the times couldn't be resisted, and that Japan had to open up to meet the world. Again, she explains that the Meiji Restoration was difficult, but it had great leaders to guide the country through tough times. The front screen then disappeared to show a second animatronic scene of author Fukuzawa Yukishi, samurai and political activist Sakamoto Ryoma, and Japan's first Prime Minister Ito Hirobumi standing around a globe. These three men discussed how Japan worked out to become a civilized yet independent nation, despite two of them being assassinated. It's very weird. All of these men are talking as though they're aware that they exist somewhere outside of time and space and are looking back at their lives in retrospect. Imagine if Lincoln stood up in Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln and was like, "Sucks that I got shot. America turned out pretty great though." The animatronic tableau disappears as the front screen shows artwork from the Meiji era and Japan's industrialization in the 19th century. Before the theatre starts to rotate again, a cartoon cannon on a blood-red background fires and the screen goes dark. The fourth and final theatre returns to the beach from the start of the show. The two children, now back in live-action form and not as animatronics, are worried about the darkness, but the crane reassures them that it's all over now. The conversation then turns to modern-day Japan, and the crane tells the children that it's their turn to build Japan's future. The screen shows a montage of modern-day Japan with people working, learning, exercising, and creating, and exercising. There's a lot of exercising. The montage then moves on to show Japanese people traveling overseas and meeting other cultures, before it fades back to the beach as the sun starts to rise. The crane creates a magical balloon for Tomoyo Midori to ride in. As the animated balloon flies off screen, a large balloon prop with animatronic versions of the two children and the crane flew over the audience waving. The attraction's main song was played in full as the balloon flew out of the theatre. Visitors would exit the theatre and walk through a small Electro Home display promoting Panasonic products of the near future. A woman communicated with the postman through a video screen intercom as hydroponic plants whirled around in the background. A man watched a television that could have its channels changed through voice commands, and their two children used television screens and electronics to do their homework. It's sort of a less ambitious version of Horizons. The attraction was an immediate flop. 6 months after it opened, the exterior of the building was redesigned with a purple color scheme, and crane motifs were added to try and communicate the attraction's Japanese focus. Tokyo Disneyland's paid Big Ten ticket book had a free ticket for Meet the World added to it to try and increase attendance. One anonymous Imagineer later told a researcher, "The spiel is full of mistakes and nobody bothered to correct it. Forget it, I don't want to talk about Meet the World. Believe me, it's an embarrassment for everyone. It's a very strange show, they don't charge for it, and practically everybody would like to see it abolished." The escapism of the American theme park was broken by this serious look at Japanese history, and it was never a popular attraction. Japanese visitors would use the theatre as a convenient place to rest for 20 minutes, showing that the time-honoured tradition of using theatre shows as places to enjoy air conditioning and a nap is one which spans continents. Despite low attendance, Meet the World managed to last almost 20 years. Initially, this was almost certainly because of Matsushita's sponsorship, but as soon as Matsushita Konosuke died in 1989, Panasonic immediately switched their sponsorship to the brand new Star Tours ride instead.
To create images is always a challenge. Digital magic.
Panasonic.
The Electro Home post-show was removed, and Meet the World was simply presented by Tokyo Disneyland. It limped along for another 13 years until it eventually closed on June 30th, 2002. The building was used for raffles and staff training before eventually being demolished a few years later in 2006. A brand new dark ride based on the film Monsters, Inc. was eventually built in its place, opening on April 15th, 2009. Meet the World might have helped save Tokyo Disneyland, but it couldn't save itself. As Tokyo Disneyland started to develop its own identity and fan culture in the years after its opening, Meet the World continued to stand out as the strange misfit that it was. After Matsushita Konosuke's death, nobody was going to spend the money to change or update the attraction, and the land it was sitting on eventually became too valuable to let it keep running empty shows. Even if the turntable issues hadn't happened to the show building in Epcot's Japan Pavilion, I honestly can't imagine a future where Meet the World would have succeeded in America either, at least not without some heavy modifications. There is a reason the World Showcase attractions focus on more benign cultural elements like costume and music and dance and scenery and rats making fine French cuisine with their little rat hands. Any references to history are kept very vague and distant at Epcot. It's centuries ago in ancient Mexico, not it's 1848 and Mexico ceded half their country to America after a bloody war. History only really gets to be fun for the victor.